Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do at DPR here in the District of Columbia. We have recently, not too recently, but back in 2013, we built our first inclusive playground at Rosedale Playground. The playground cost about, $1.5 million in total. So it was a very expensive playground, but that doesn't mean you couldn't do an inclusive playground with less money. We just happened to have that much for that project, so we were very fortunate to have that budget. So let me see if I can figure this out. So I gave this presentation to a fourth grade class, but I thought the principals were still good enough that we could still talk about these today. So what does being inclusive mean to us at DPR and to me? And at the time we were working on the Rosedale Playground. Our director at the time had a young daughter who was severely disabled, and he really challenged us to think about ways his daughter would be able to participate in this new playground, and challenged us to ways to think about different ways to engage everybody, not just people with able-bodied children, but children with disabilities, physical disabilities, social issues, psychological issues, even able-bodied kids. We want everybody to be able to play together, including their parents or cousins or whoever might be at the playground with them. So this first slide is just talking a little bit about everyone in the first picture, if you can see it. Everyone has an equal number of boxes to stand on. And this is a baseball game, a Wega, the baseball? Is that right? Yeah. Remember that one. So everybody has the same number of boxes to stand on, but that doesn't mean everybody can see what's going on in the baseball game. So everybody has an equal number, but this does not mean that this is an inclusive situation. So we have to think about broadening our ideas of what equality means. What does being an inclusive society mean? What does it mean to have an inclusive play space? So in the next slide, the second picture in the middle, it's a little bit different. Now the person on the right has two boxes to stand on. So now everybody can see the baseball game. But is this an inclusive situation? Would you say that this is inclusive? Does this seem fair based on age and ability? What would you say? Well, at first it might seem so, but what if there were no boxes and the boxes were too heavy to move? And how do you also get if a child is in a wheelchair, how does that child get on top of the box? So these are some things we started to think about too as we went through the design process. So now on the third picture, what's different now? What's changed? Can you tell? Now we have removed. Exactly. We create an opportunity and a space for all people to be equal and inclusive. So we remove the barrier so that everything is all inclusive for everyone, right? So this was great. The fourth graders loved this slide. They thought it was really good. And I'm a visual learner, so this was really super helpful for me to understand. And hopefully this is understandable as well. So again, what is an inclusive playground design? What does that mean to us at DPR? We obviously want all of our spaces to be inclusive to people of all ages, regardless of age and regardless of ability. We want to promote development, mental development, physical development, social development. I remember when I started to speak in public, I would turn red, I would shake, but over time, I was able to develop my social skills so I wouldn't have a panic attack when I would speak in front of people. We want to promote physical activity. In Washington, D.C., there is a really big problem with obesity in Ward 7 or 8, so those are communities east of the river. There's a 20-age disparity in the longevity of how long people live between those two areas. There's an income disparity of about half, so people that live on the west side of the river earn about twice as much as those that live on the east side. So when we chose a playground to do an inclusive playground, we were looking at places that were were deserts for this sort of space. So this is, again, something we looked at. We also wanted to promote learning. We want people to come into this environment and be able to learn about the history of the site, about the history of Washington, D.C. And we also want people to have fun. That's what it's all about. So if you can learn and have fun at the same time, I think you're doing something pretty positive. So we looked at 7 principles of inclusive design as we designed and built the Rosedale Playground. The first consideration we looked at is we wanted to be fair to everyone. And what this meant to us is that play environments should be designed to be fair, to allow everyone to participate as independently as possible with their siblings, neighbors, caregivers, brothers, sisters, friends. And so the picture on the right is of Rosedale Playground. You can see that the playground has a theme of Washington, D.C., so all the things you might see in Washington, D.C., like the U.S. Capitol as shown in the picture, or the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial. You may have seen some of these things. We incorporated these into the playground, so when children would come into the playground, they're getting an education about the city and the history of the city without really knowing it. They're getting this education without knowing it. So we're tricking them a little bit. And as you can also see in the picture, there are minimum requirements for ADA accessibility ramps. In this particular situation, we wanted to go above and beyond the minimums so that if there were 2 people in wheelchairs, that they would be able to go together from point A to point B, or a caregiver or a child in a wheelchair would be able to do this together. We've seen a lot of situations throughout the city where people will do the minimum and you can barely get through a space. And sometimes if you have 2 children in a double stroller or a larger wheelchair, it's not wide enough to accommodate those access. The second principle that we looked at with inclusive design is we want everybody to feel included, of course, and we want to allow participation of individuals with diverse abilities and social and physical activities for inclusive and intergenerational play. And I know I've said intergenerational a couple of times, but in DC we have a lot of families where we'll have a grandparent who is raising the child. Sometimes the parents are really busy at work. Sometimes, honestly, they are not around. So we're trying to build spaces that are comfortable and accessible for all age groups at once. The picture you can see here on the right is called a sway fund. And this particular piece of equipment allows for multiple wheelchairs to come into this apparatus and rock back and forth. So again, able-bodied children can play with a child in a wheelchair if that was the situation. The third principle for inclusive playground design that we incorporated is we wanted to be smart and think smart so that the play environment should be easy to understand, yet allow individuals to be successful and gain confidence through play. So if you've been to DC, you might have noticed that in front of the Lincoln Memorial, there is the large reflecting pool, this body of water. So in the surfacing at the playground, we actually put this reflecting pool as a different shade of blue. And what we have seen, what we saw happen is children, like the child to the left that might have trouble walking, can start at one end of that pool and can set a goal. Today, I'm going to walk halfway to the other end of the reflecting pool. And we would literally see children set a goal to get halfway across. And then the next week, I'm going to go all the way across. So creating those opportunities for children to have, to make those confidence gains is really, really important. The fourth principle is we want everyone to feel independent. So the playground equipment or the play environment should allow children to explore and participate at their own level. So at Rosedale, we did install equipment that's called sensory equipment, and this is located on the ground level. It's at eye level. If someone in a wheelchair would be able to come up to it, touch it. Sometimes it plays music. It does different things. So it's a tactile experience and also an audio experience. So we're trying to engage different senses with the design. So there's many situations like this you might see at the Rosedale Playground. Sometimes it's play equipment, sometimes it's a sign that talks about the history of Washington, D.C. So again, trying to keep kids to be able to feel independent and from go to point A to B and be able to interact with equipment on their own. The fifth principle, we want this to be a safe environment, obviously. Play spaces should be safe and allow children of all abilities to develop their skills through fun and challenging play opportunities and to take risks. So we want children to take risks. We want children, when I grew up on a farm. And so we didn't have playground equipment. We had trees and barns. So we would climb to the top of a tree, jump out of a tree, and if we hurt ourselves, we knew not to do that again. So we would jump from a lower branch. So we have similar situations at the Rosedale Playground. This is a picture of a very small slide that's close to the surface where one day a child could go down the small slide, and the next day, or when they feel brave enough to take that risk, there are different slides at a taller elevation, so they can take those risks on different days, and there is flexibility in the equipment and different opportunities to express your risks or your risk taking. The sixth principle is to be active. Obviously, we want all of our users to have various degrees of challenge and alternatives to sustained physical effort that allow everyone to participate in physical and social play. So again, I know I've talked a little bit about this before, but we want both able-bodied children and disabled children to be able to play together. In all of our playgrounds, we install, as a picture on the left, you can see this is called an adaptive harness swing seat, and this helps to support a child that may not be able to support themselves upright. So maybe somebody might lack the core strength to be able to sit physically upright. So this would allow a child to be able to sit and swing and actually swing on their own with another able-bodied child that's in the swing seat right next to them. So a brother and sister could swing together, or a parent and a child could play together that way. And in the picture on the right, you can sort of see a larger image of what Rosedale Playground looks like. You can see the United States Capitol dome there in the picture, along with some other the Washington Monument there as well. So it's really a lot of opportunities to play and be physically active. And then the last principle is that we wanted everyone to feel comfortable. This play environment should be usable for individuals with sensory needs, diverse body sizes, posture, mobility, and motor control. There are multiple ways, again, to interact with this playground and the play equipment. In the picture to the right, I'm sorry, forgot to go forward. The picture to the right is an example of some interpretive signage we did. So it talks a little bit about the history of the airplane and how the airplane was developed, along with other signage throughout the space where you can push a button and it'll tell you a story about how Washington, D.C. was created. And it does it in 7 different languages. So we're trying to educate again. We're trying to use all of our senses through hearing, through sensory and tactile, again, to get the most out of our play experience with our children. And a couple other considerations, and I'm almost done, that we weren't able to include at Rosedale, but we are including in our other play spaces, is to include sensory gardens and plants. Again, this engages the senses through smell and texture. We found that children really love these places where they can go and plant flowers or vegetables and understand how bees pollinate flowers and how vegetables, actually you eat vegetables that they come from a garden, not the grocery store. Another thing that we've really tried to be more conscious of is shade in our playgrounds, and that's really something that we hear. Probably number one complaint, if we don't do it, is to incorporate more and more shade in our play spaces. We actually had a child this week who had to go to the emergency room because he stepped on a piece of metal in one of our play spaces that had gotten so hot it actually burnt his foot. So it was just a lesson learned for us to keep looking at those ideas to make sure we are including as much shade as possible so that the playground is usable, on days when it's 90 degrees or it's 100 degrees outside. Another thing we talk about a lot is incorporating benches with seat backs so that everybody has a place to feel comfortable and a place to sit. That's our standard policy now. Every bench we do has to have a back on it. And then the last thing I think we're trying to do more of is incorporate musical play. And again, this is just another way to engage children and playground users and play space users with another opportunity to be creative and to express their musical ability, to hear these sounds through audio stimuli. So again, another thing to think about when you look at these spaces. And again, this is the last slide. This is sort of our concept design of Rosedale Playground. And as you can see, the burgundy or brown colors are all the accessible ramps that link all the play together. So a child can go from literally one side of the playground to the other side without ever having to get off a ramp or get onto the ground. And so they can share these spaces with able-bodied children or able-bodied caregivers. So it's a really nice experience. We've got a lot of good feedback from this. And I think you can also see a few of the Washington Monument details. The Washington Monuments, or the Washington Monuments there in the middle, the Capitol, the Lincoln Steps. There's a memorial to Martin Luther King Jr. That's actually in the playground. And if you hit a button, you can hear him give his speech from the 1960s when he gave his speech in 7 different languages again. So it's been quite successful, but we have more to learn and more to obviously do as we go forward, but since it's their only inclusive playground we have in our inventory right now. So gracias, thank you so much for letting me speak today. Thank you.